Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Now, here at Solved and Best of the Left, we believe in looking for ways to reduce suffering and craft both policy and culture to increase human happiness and flourishing. And today, I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're excited to share some ideas to reduce the suffering and increase the happiness of white supremacists. Are we all?
Oh boy. I knew you were going to do something like that.
Am I wrong, though? I think, look. White supremacists have some ideas of their own that they think would bring them happiness. And we happen to believe that they're wrong about that. So they might not like our ideas, but we are going to argue persuasively that we're right anyways, and that it would be to white supremacists' own benefit to hear us out. That's what we're talking about.
That's fair.
Yeah. I won you back.
Sort of.
Speaking of ideas we don't agree with, building segregated communities from which to build a whites-only nation. We start with this article from the Southern Poverty Law Center that does a great job of tracking hate groups around the country. And this headline, Inside Return to the Land, a new group attempting to legalize segregation. And the founder, who is a Nazi and is trying to build a whites-only housing project, talks about it this way in the article. It says, quote, residents repackage and peddle segregation as something moral and necessary. One resident told Sky News the compound was about, quote, trying to embrace our culture and our heritage. It's been denigrated, if you ask me. Another told the outlet, quote, it's a loving movement. And all emphasized that their whites-only community was not about exclusion. That's a great sentence. But celebrating their own racial group, a common argument among white nationalists seeking to make their racist beliefs more palatable to a public audience. Because obviously there's anti-discrimination in housing laws. And so they're doing this like bullshit sleight of hand where it's not property ownership, it's limited liability corporation ownership that is vetted through a questionnaire to make sure that you're a white supremacist. And then you get to own part of the corporation, which gives you access to the land. It's just like a stupid loophole. And that's everything you need to know about it.
That will probably get through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, that's their idea. They're like, as far as timing goes, we're at the best possible moment to try to slip this past the extremely conservative courts we have. And yeah, there's very legitimate fear that it would get by the courts. And so obviously we just need legislation that closes the loophole, because the courts might say like, well, by the letter of the law. And so we just need more letters in that law.
Yeah, of course, if you ask a civil rights lawyer, they say this is absolutely not the intention of the law. And this still falls under discrimination 100%.
Absolutely.
And they explicitly say that they want this to go to court.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing that I find, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but the fact that they are so hopeful, like really like all borderline confident that this is going to work. And the reasons they give for that are that we're in a country where there's extremely conservative, if you want to use that word, president, but also the courts are conservative for the most part. And he also says they chose Arkansas because it is a very red state and they're likely to have a judge that's on their side. And I just want to say, I know there's not a lot of conservatives listening to our show, but when white supremacists are hopeful that any conservative judge or any conservative person is going to be on their side, conservatives that still have some decency should wake up and realize that they need to have a look at the side that they're associated with.
I also think we've talked about it in terms of acts of violence, but this is a testament to our current administration that acts like this would be emboldened, that they feel like the culture tides, the political tides are
Mhm.
on their side, which is the quote right opportunity to bring this, to the courts, bring an action like this. I don't know that I see, like, let's say it got up to the Supreme Court. I don't know that they would have an appetite for something so blatant. I mean,
I
we'll
don't
we'll
know.
see how it
Yeah, I don't
progresses.
know.
We'll see what the documents look like. But right now, in every article that we've read about it, it's very blatant, the objective, that I think the Supreme Court would have a hard time twisting it. Now, if there was a gap, if there's an opportunity, that's when my confidence would shake a little. But as it stands right now,
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly in the vein of what golf clubs have been doing for a century or maybe more, which is this is a private club and we get to decide who's in and who's out. And so they're using that same legal standpoint as a way to fulfill their white supremacist dreams. And, like knocking down whatever law underpins that, like, yeah, there might be some consequences, but at this point, if this is how it's going to be used, then we have to make sure there is no precedent of any kind supporting their attempts.
My friend went to the University of Arkansas in the early 2000s, and it was still technically a dry county that U of A was in, which means that, they couldn't sell alcohol, couldn't buy
Mhm.
alcohol. But every restaurant in town could sell alcohol because you would join a private membership so that you could buy alcohol because you were a member of the club. So this is like the perfect place to do that because they
Yeah.
already had some backward ass nonsense laws to get around just basic logic.
Mm.
Like, just make it not a dry county anymore. I think they've
Right.
done that since, but that's what it was for years, and they're really practiced in getting around laws. And to circle back to something Amanda said earlier, there are two groups in this country that think the Republican Party is now a fascist party. That is leftist and Nazis.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
we are in agreement about one thing.
Right.
Mhm.
I just want to clarify, Deon, are you helping the legal case in this in any way?
So, not tr-
Feels
no.
like you're giving some legal back
I'm
argument.
assuming they already know
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're in
I mean,
Arkansas.
well,
Yeah.
fascists are stupid. So,
Yes.
so that sounds like an amicus brief you're about to file on behalf of.
A good lawyer can defend both sides, right?
That's right. That's right. Okay, so speaking like culturally here, obviously red pilling comes up. So that gets described by the founder of this group. It says, quote, according to an interview with the New York Times, his interactions with commenters on his YouTube videos led Orwell to become red pill, the term white supremacists use to describe becoming aware of supposed racial differences and the alleged persecution of white people, end quote. Super, super quick side note. I just want to mention that I was contacted by a commenter, not at all about like racism or anything like that. It's an anti-vaxxer presenting what would be like the equivalent of red pill facts. And it's always misinformation and like statistics presented by people who don't know how to do math. Like that is fundamentally what is always the basis of all of this stuff. Everyone being red pilled, they're being presented with like wildly cherry picked data that does not stand up to scrutiny in any way, but the people presenting it may or may not know that, and the people receiving it definitely don't. And so I just want to point out that is exactly what happened. Everyone who ends up believing in race science just like doesn't know how to read science or think critically. So that's what happened here. But culturally speaking, like they describe having concerns about their own culture, and they're presented with this idea of maybe this is the problem, maybe it's anti-white racism or whatever. And I just wanted to dive into that a little bit. So even by their own standards, I think the whiteness that they hold dear, they describe only in like reaction to or comparison with the existence of people of color. And so Tim Wise is a white guy who is an anti-racist educator. And he talks at length about this. And I think it's in his book, White Like Me, and talks about how whiteness is a fake cultural category, which makes it feel hollow. And that there are studies or surveys that get done, and white people, like if you just ask, just like not white supremacists, just like average white people, like, hey, to like describe your culture as a white person, what very often comes out is descriptions of what we are not and how not being black or brown affects us. There is very little, as a white person, I positively feel this or that way about anything. It's like not how culture connects in our brains related to whiteness. And the same goes for these white supremacists. But Tim Wise's argument is that because race is a fiction and whiteness is not real, except as being not a person of color, what white people who feel this sort of like hole, this lack of culture, need to do is dive deeper, because like whiteness is not a category, but like where your personal ancestry comes from is. You could dive deeper into that, and you then don't have to fall into toxic white nationalism or ideas of racial supremacy, when you could just be like, my family came from Poland or Germany or England or France or wherever. And you just be like, that's where my culture comes from. And like, that's where my ancestors came from. And that's interesting. And all these places have interesting cultural histories that you could draw on and take pride in. Like, there's nothing wrong with like having an appreciation for where you come from. But the fact that whiteness is fake and then trying to turn fake whiteness into a real culture means that there's nothing really there except the centuries old lie of white supremacy. And so it's like sort of a tragic thing. It's a trap that these people fall into. The hole in their soul is real. They don't know what to put there. And the only suggestion they come across is white supremacy. But there are actually other ways to approach it.
It's also the fact that this is what happens when colonization happens. So after a few generations, you lose touch, right? Maybe the first generation still had language and traditions. By the second generation, a lot of those have been lost. By the third generation, a lot of them have been lost. And that's what happens. Like, you have to actively hold on to those things if you want to have something to connect with. And marginalized communities and immigrants have held on more because they are like, first of all, the entire premise that their way of life or something is being oppressed is absolutely ridiculous. We are living in white culture. Whatever that is what our status quo is, because everything is geared towards white people, whether it's positions of power or catering things to them. Like, that is how this country is. Anything else that exists is through like actively trying to hold on to culture, because white culture absorbs, flattens, and erases. That's like what it is. That's like almost all that it is, right? So their jealousy of anybody who has a rich culture and heritage and who celebrates it is understandable, but their response to that is vile and misinformed is the lightest term I could use.
This is like an argument you see online, and I've actually had this argument in real life. Like, what's the difference between someone saying white power and what's the difference between someone saying black power? And in that is a couple things. One, the white power is trying to elevate this, as Tim Wise said, hollow culture that is everything Amanda just said, and that's what they're elevating. Whereas black power is coming from a place of trying to build some power and hanging on to a culture that was in a lot of ways lost and shaped by being taken from somewhere. Like, I'm a biracial man. My mom's side of the family is white, my dad's side of the family is black. I can trace back on my mom's side to where her family was from in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that with my dad's side of the family. I can say, West Africa, but the fuck does that mean? Like there's limitations there
Mm-hmm.
because there are different cultures in West Africa. There are different countries, there are different tribes, there's different all kinds of things. Could be from a couple, could be from many, could be from who knows. There's just a limit there. And Black power and Black culture has been about trying to preserve some sense of what was brought over when enslaved people were brought over here, and creating something new out of this situation that was forced upon
Mm-hmm.
Black people. Whereas white culture is this sense of loss that Amanda was talking. Like, it's a losing touch of culture, and like it's instructive in the name, like return to the land.
Mm.
That's what a lot of this idea with these white supremacists is that the land is really the culture. Well, what land are you talking about? You're talking about this land that your ancestors came over and took over from some other people, while you've lost touch with the land that your ancestors are from.
Mm-hmm.
You have lost touch with that. So yeah, go dig deeper, go find out where you're actually from, and incorporate that into your life, incorporate that into who you are and your beliefs about yourself. Don't impose this fiction. It's this living in the fiction part that is really the issue. They're creating these myths that will never have any roots because they're not real. And as long as they're living in this not real world, they're going to keep lashing out and blaming and only be against something as opposed to being for something.
Apparently, we're just going to dive full into empathy for this group of
Well,
people who
you know.
I do find despicable, but I can empathize. So I think what frustrates this is like the misconception of power and like who has it, who you need to take it back from. So I think the anger and the emptiness that is felt is very valid. Who they blame for that, what they
Mhm.
need to take back, is obviously the problem. And I think this has to do with our storytelling, like what we actually talk about, what we're educated on, the true American history. Because there was a concerted effort to make this group of white people. It just didn't happen. It's not like we all share a very fundamental thing that defines whiteness. But there was a concerted effort in America specifically to have a more homogenous group. And through that was devaluing culture that people came over with. Specifically in the second wave of immigration from Europe, a lot of Italians, the Irish, they came in with their own culture. They also created areas and sent their kids to schools together, things like that. But America did not find that acceptable for our homogenous group, for us to oppress other nations, other people. So they integrated them into this culture of whiteness. There was a concerted effort through education. A lot of children went to school. They learned about American cuisine. They learned about American, quote, life. And it, again, devalued their own culture. And it was targeted and in school specifically so that they would carry them into their future families. So, I mean, to act like, oh, well, you just integrate and over time you lose that culture because of, I don't know, something great in America that takes over. Like, it's complete bullshit. This was orchestrated. Like, there is a reason why whiteness is a category, why it's a group of people. So I feel like the anger is completely valid, but like point your finger in the right direction, which is this system of creating homogeny.
So speaking of the Irish, if you weren't convinced by that argument about whiteness being fake, we thought we'd look at the other angle too of like what can happen when you actually do have a practically homogenous society. And so we're going to the old country to look at Ireland with this article first, irishpost.com, the reality of ethnic and sectarian divisions. And the article describes in some detail how Irish identifying Catholics and British identifying Protestants in Northern Ireland are practically indistinguishable. It says, quote, both are white, both speak English in the same way, neither has distinctive cultural attire apart from football shirts. Their sense of humor will be much the same, and so on and so on. But the Irish in Northern Ireland, around the borders, are also one of the most famous examples of a bunch of white people who are absolutely at each other's throats and have been for generations. I mean, sorry, not currently. The tensions are still there, but the troubles that went on throughout the 1900s were extremely serious and were taking place between people who, from the American perspective, would all be thought of as white people. The point being, people will always find something to fight about. Always. So the dream of white nationalism tells a false story, not just in terms of race being fake, which it definitely is, but in terms of the fantasy that, well, if only all the brown people went away, then we could live happily ever after in peace. And that is simply not the case. That is not how humans work. We will always find reasons to fight with each other and be angry with each other. And so, skip past the part where you fantasize that that won't be the case and work toward not fighting with each other by just recognizing that we're all going to have to live together, rather than fantasizing that, well, maybe if I'm angry enough, long enough, I can get those other people to disappear, because they're not going to disappear.
That's always the fascinating thing about white supremacists to me, is their apparent lack of knowledge about European history. Like, if we just got rid of the black people here, if we just got rid of the brown people, the Asian people here, everything would be great. This would become, if this was just a white society with no other people, it would turn into factional, regional ethnicities, whatever. I'm a Missourian. I can't stand these Kansonians or whatever. I don't actually know what they're called, Kansans, but that would be exactly what happened. That's what happened in Europe. Look, the 100 Years' War. These people were not just getting along because they all had the same skin tone. That's nonsense. It's so childish. That's the fundamental thing I think I have a problem with. White supremacy is so childish if you think about it for more than a couple minutes. But that's what they're hanging on to, as opposed to looking deeper, thinking about what Erin said, why do I not have this connection to my past? What happened? All these factors they think would be solved because they have melanin, I don't have melanin, the end. That's the solution to the problem. It's so childish.
Which, I mean, is the point of making this category of whiteness. It's so that you lose all connection to your culture and you'll fight, to subjugate other people, because that's exactly what they want. There was a lot of migration happening. Obviously, they needed a bigger political power, a bigger group of people to fight back against it. And that is how the Irish became white in America. So I also would like to point out that 46 plus versions of Christianity. So yes, we will always find something that separates us, that
a lot of words
distinguishes us from others. Yeah. And it is, I agree with him. I would like to say, for any white nationalist listening, I'm sorry, you're a simp. You fell right into this very evident plan to get you to vote against your own interests, because at the end of the day, every country has some form of fill in the blank. If it's not racism, it might be colorism. It might be, again, yes, the religiosity of, each region. We would devolve back into that if we did not have BIPOC people. And also, reading all of these articles just created such a horrific image in my mind of what our country would look like if we didn't have BIPOC people, if we didn't have diversity in culture. It would be a wasteland. And also miserable people. Because this kind of faction, this hatred, it does not create an environment where you're like, man, everybody's just so welcoming and loving, despite what little slogan they have. They're not about exclusion. Yeah, okay. This would be a very hateful group to be a part of, and no thank you. That is not the America I would like to live in.
Yeah, so this article continues, kind of getting at what it is really like to live in sectarian tension, which is what we're all describing right now. It says, quote, Public bodies concerned with sectarian division, disputes over parades, flags, community rights, etc., tend to focus on how rights can be endorsed and respected rather than on how the promotion of identity can be irritating and ought to be reduced. And it goes on, quote, for the problem at heart is not simply that two identities sit side by side and incidentally rankle each other through ignorance. It's that each rivals the other, each preserves its coherence through conflict with the other, generated by political representatives or hardcore purists who often have violent inclinations or tend to be indulgent of others who do. Were the acrimony to subside, cultural division would be blunted too, and the horrific prospect for many would emerge of actual tension free integration. So, an ideology built on exclusion, usually foundationally about anger, will never find an end point where you can then stop being angry. Like, good thing we were angry and hated those people long enough that they disappeared and we could purge them. And now we can just chill and be happy. Like, the anger and division will be maintained in perpetuity. That is your inevitable forever future. If you decide, like, I think the right thing to do is to be angry now to get us to that better place. That better place doesn't exist. There might be some version of life that's different than now, but like, it is not calm and happy. It is perpetual anger. And it reminds me of this short story that I could not find no matter how hard I tried, but I'm very confident that many years ago, I heard a story of a woman who was either, married to the mother of like an ISIS fighter, and she was in it. She was in the Islamic extremism, endorsed it, went along with it, supported it, and eventually was like, I'm exhausted from being angry all the time. Like, I can't do it anymore. I got to get out of here. Like, she left the movement and, was interviewed sometime somewhere that I heard. And the takeaway that stuck with me was, it wasn't like I saw the error of my ways and everyone's humanity, and now I believe in empathy. Like, she might have thought that too, but she was just like, I'm so tired. We spent all day, every day hating our enemies. I have other things I need to do with my finite energy. And it took up too much of her life and her mental space. And that was her main takeaway, was like, it's too exhausting to be that angry.
And the thing that never gets talked about amongst these extremist groups is how anger makes you weak and vulnerable to those wanting to exploit it. And in this world that we live in, the rich, the elites, those with actual power will absolutely use the anger and the hatred to make you do whatever they need you to do. And it's happening right now. That's what we're witnessing is, I'm taking this now back to the political divisions in this country, which, fall pretty hard along racial lines in many cases, but that anger and that vitriol and that time spent, energy spent fighting each other is so easy to use by those with actual real power. And this group, that's creating their little, racist homesteads across the country, they don't see how vulnerable they are. They don't see how easily they can be co-opted and manipulated because their whole focus, all of their energy is on hatred and trying to exclude. And I don't want to make it sound as neutered as, some of the publications that wrote about it. They are actively saying violent, horrible things. So, and, we don't know what they might get up to when nobody's watching, but they are saying really vile, hateful, and violent things on the internet and don't care that everyone can see it. So that is the weakest place you can be as someone who is full of hate and vengeance and with a really deeply entrenched, misguided feeling that you are being oppressed. All of that can easily be manipulated by those with real power.
And to underscore that point, what Jay said about the leader of the Return to the Land movement, he was not red pilled by YouTube videos. He was red pilled by YouTube comments,
Yeah.
comments on videos. He's a different level of easily manipulated by anonymous commenters. You're like, oh yeah, I think you do have a good point.
Yeah.
Red pill 775997. Like, you're making a lot of sense. That is what we're talking about here. Everybody has the ability to be manipulated. None of us are above it, but some are more susceptible than others. And if you have decided that you can no longer live next to anyone who doesn't agree with you completely, then you might be the most gullible person on planet Earth.
Well, and on an individual level, like, it is so avoidant behavior. So, like, I don't even know the philosophy to get there, that the decision in any kind of conflict will like pretend that there's a conflict that they're referencing in their grievances against BIPOC people. But if there's a conflict, like, you're just running away. You're just like self-isolating. You're avoiding any
Yeah.
kind of interaction with that group. Like, and I'm not saying it's no surprise that in America, individuals don't necessarily have the best coping skills when it comes to confrontation. When it comes to solving things like this, I don't know, might have to do with how we rewrite history constantly to not make ourselves feel bad. uh, but yes, on a very basic level, I mean, like, as individuals, you clearly cannot handle conflict in any like a mature adult way.
So there's a bonus quote in an article that I didn't send around for this conversation, and I only remembered now that I had it. But here's what this guy, the founder of that Nazi compound, says about who he wants around him. And this is in an interview with a British outlet. The Sky News outlet went to the compound, interviewed a bunch of people, didn't entirely whitewash it, but like didn't describe it as harshly as they probably should have. And so this is from that conversation. And it says, quote, "For all Orwell's talk of different cultures or moralities, skin color is what matters to him. I'm white. And when I ask whether I would be accepted into RTTL on that basis, Orwell says I probably would." Remembering this is a British reporter. So he says, quote, "I point out that I don't know anything about white American culture, but that he'd rather have me than, say, an American from a mixed heritage background. The problem," he says, "is their children." And then this is quoting the Nazi founder, quote, "Even if an individual has all the same values I have, if they have an ethnic identity that other people share and care about, their children will also have that identity, and their children might not necessarily have all the same beliefs that they have," end quote. I was like, I got news for you about children in
Yeah.
general. Like,
What the hell? They're not your clones? Like, even a clone wouldn't have the
there's
same.
always a chance. I mean, it's absurd. Like, every single person is their own individual, and they are going to grow up, being largely influenced by their parents. But like, yeah, that's, race is not the deciding factor on whether you end up with a carbon copy set of values or a close approximation, as is more usually the case. But that's the degree to which he wants everyone around him to be exactly like him. And he wants for everyone's kids to also be exactly like him. And then he'll be comfortable. I got news for you, dude. You're never going to be comfortable in this world.
Right.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. The link of like being, and again, I'm taking it down to individual level, of being able to problem solve, being able to work with people who may not be exactly to you. Like, clearly in that quote, they're prioritizing their emotional comfort over actual problem solving solutions. Like, and I think that goes to why you come up with a simple answer of like, well, clearly I don't know how to rectify my own identity in a diverse culture. So I need to like isolate. I need to create more homogenous society.
Erin,
Like,
I think they've created a safe space.
It
I
is.
think that's
It's
what
absolutely a
happens.
safe space. I mean, we do know that they're gentle snowflakes and sometimes they need a little coddling, but
Yeah.
social emotional development is so important. And the fact that we don't fund schools or like make sure that all of them have psychologists that can run programming to make sure that social emotional development is prioritized, like, yeah, we're always going to have a society with groups of people who are like,
Broken.
yeah, they're broken and they're like, yeah, I'm going to take my ball and like go
Mhm.
home with it and only share with the people who agree exactly 100% with
Mhm.
me. Like what?
Yeah. The safe space is 100%, like totally undeniable. The snowflake analogy, though, I'm starting to wonder. I always thought the snowflake criticism was that they're so like delicate and melt easily, and combined with the like everyone's an individual. And now I'm starting to think like that's actually the bigger problem for them. It's like, no, 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 we are not snowflakes. We are all identical to each other.
Yeah.
That is their demand. Their
Yeah.
greatest fear would be having individuality and being different from
Yeah.
one another.
They would like to be cookie cutter. Yeah. Just churn it out in a factory the same.
On a broader political level, we hear all the time, like in the progressive world, that we don't want to have these purity tests and this argument about that. And I think that's a terrible framing. I think what's happening with the left is constant arguments and discussions about, the right way to do things and disagreeing with people with different views. And it's not a purity test argument, and it's not a circular firing squad. It's disagreement with different people and different values and coming together and figuring out how to move forward. Whereas what they want over here is uniformity, no disagreements, no arguments, no discussion, no feelings of, questions of anything. Everything
Mhm.
has an answer. There's nothing to be discussed. There's nothing to question. It's all decided. And again, like Jay said, bad news. That's not how the world works. That's not
Mhm.
how humanity works. And, not to scare them too much, white people are the minority on planet Earth.
It's
I
terrifying.
think that, there's a few more Chinese people than all of white people on planet Earth. It's scary times for them.
Oh boy, don't make it worse, Deon.
They're already so scared.
I know. Yeah. So we have more evidence continuing in Ireland and getting closer to the point that people always have things to fight about, and going down the path of fear and anger only perpetuates indefinitely. You never get to an end point where you get to stop being fearful and angry, which brings us to this Reuters article. Legacy of past hangs over anti-immigrant violence in Northern Ireland. And it says, quote, sectarianism and racism have never been very different from each other, said Dominic Bryan, a professor at Queen's University Belfast who researches group identity and political violence. Continuing the quote, it doesn't totally surprise me that as society changes and Northern Ireland has become a very different society than it was even 30 years ago, that some of this outgrouping shifts, Brian said, adding that such prejudices could also be seen among Irish nationalists, end quote. So again, the anger and exclusion never ends. It may shift. You may have to change the group of people you're angry at or hateful toward. But if your goal is to live in a community where everyone feels and thinks and acts exactly the same, then your tolerance level becomes so low that anyone could be ripe to be put in an out group at any moment. And then the conflict flares up again. It doesn't have to be race based, it doesn't have to be religion based, it can be anything at any time. And this is sort of what's happening. It's, in this case, immigrants who, for global reasons that we don't have time to discuss today, but have at length in the past, like they become the sort of transfer of anger and outgroup mentality. Like, okay, you're the new outgroup. And it's very, very predictable.
And of course, the article goes on to mention the economic situation. I mean, look, there are hateful people who are doing well. That's not to say that just if you're economically down and out, it makes you, xenophobic and a white supremacist. But there are reasons for why these movements grow and at times are larger than at other times in history. And often those are because of economic forces. And so in this article, they mentioned the towns involved in these kind of anti immigrant sentiment in Northern Ireland in particular all have big economic problems, substandard housing, and rely on healthcare and industries such as meatpacking and manufacturing that need an increasing migrant workforce. The people around here, they're literally at a boiling point, said a resident of the town where this is happening. That boiling point is clearly not just I'm afraid of others, right? It comes from somewhere else. And the root of it is I feel unsafe, right? So as we were saying, these are very scared people, the people that we're talking about in the US primarily, but anybody who falls into this way of thinking or into this idea that somehow someone else is harming them when really there's nothing to connect the two, that breeds just a overall feeling of vulnerability, of I'm not safe, of my world may crumble at any moment. And then you look for a scapegoat. My God, we have been told this lesson throughout history over and over and over again, that when things are not good, when people do not feel secure, they look for who has hurt them. And it's much easier to look at someone who is either looks differently than you, believes something differently than you, came from somewhere else that you didn't come from, and say, well, they're obviously the problem. Because grasping for like any sort of low hanging fruit to explain away why your life is not so good is how humans cope. Like it's wrong and it's not intelligent, but it's how humans cope. Meanwhile, we never point the fingers where they are supposed to go, which in most cases include the extremely wealthy people who are trying to hoard wealth, who are trying to just gut industries to see what they can get out of it to make their wealth grow. Politicians who don't really care about anything other than their own personal agendas and their own personal careers. The fact is, like, this is so, again, I don't know that this really comes down to empathy. It's just like, it is so understandable. It is so easy to see. And it has repeated itself over and over and over through history. And so here we are again. And all the same problems exist, and the landscape is nearly the same. The differences are in our means of technology, and those do make a big difference because, as we talked about before, there are forces that want to manipulate and they can use those tools very easily. But it usually doesn't come from nowhere, is my point. You don't just wake up one day and say, I hate you. It usually comes from some other place of feeling on edge, some sort of precarity.
One, it's interesting in the fact that in our culture that is so heavily individualistic, this group of people have like come together to collectively recognize that they need each other. They need a group. They just are so misinformed that
Yeah.
they've decided to like try to make it, I don't even want to say like the same, because everyone you bring in, no matter what, is going to add some diversity to your group. Like I do think that they missed that point in their vision for this like sameness that everybody's going to bring, that everybody's going to like buy into the same ideology, they're all going to have the same background, that there's something that unites them. And in reality, you're always going to have diversity, no matter if it's racial diversity or otherwise. So I do want, I don't know, do I give them credit? Is that the word I'm looking for? Like
No.
they aren't so far from our conversations about, yes, you need other people, you need community. They're just kind of assholes about it, right? Like they just don't think community's for everyone, that you can only be in community with certain
with someone exactly like you.
and that's where the line has
Well,
to be drawn at that point.
That's the danger with a lot of like online Nazis, like Nick Fuentes specifically, when taken out of context or when they clip it in a way that makes it sound like he's making sense. Like a lot of these people can assess the problem that is at hand. It's always what's the source of the problem and what's the solution that the wild conclusions are. Like, I don't think it's necessarily interesting that the individualistic nature of our society has caused these people to think collectively. I think it's part of the problem. That's a huge issue. Like, this society kind of forced this honestly unnatural way of thinking onto an entire group of people, this libertarian, this every man is an island kind of philosophy. It's not how life works. It's not how their life works. It's not how any human being on Earth's life works. Because if you are a human being on Earth, at least two people were involved in you being here and becoming an adult. I don't know how many Tarzan stories there are that you weren't raised by other human beings, but that's just not how it works here. Everyone needs other people. And we're constantly fed this myth that you can be this self-made man, specifically. I rarely hear self-made woman, but self-made man, and do all these things on your own. Like, that's just not true. So obviously these people, just like almost everyone in America, is struggling with the reality of this system that doesn't comport with human life. So they're coming up with this, again, childish solution. White man good, white man be with white man, white woman listen to white man.
They'd love that.
like that's it. That's as far as they've gone. And because they are still functionally children and haven't thought about it much, they haven't gotten past the point where, these people, like Erin said, they're going to be a little different than you too. It just is. But maybe they'll learn to work with people who are different if they also have the same skin tone. I don't know. Some white people tan better than others too. That might be a problem in the future.
We'd have colorism
yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah. So, I mean, the real tragedy is that race is fake. I mean, it's not a tragedy. It's fine. But I would rather talk about things that are real. I've had this problem for like 20 years talking about politics. I'm just like, could we just get back to the point where we talk about problems that are real, where we agree on reality and then like disagree on what to do about it? But no, this is a really big one. Race is totally fake, and yet it is completely embedded in how people see and understand the world. And so we have to sort of beat this point over and over again. Which brings us to, this is just an article on Medium that did a good job of summarizing all this, called "The Irish Had to Ask to Be White," and then explains race sort of in general. It says, quote, "Race as we understand it today isn't rooted in biology. It's a social construct designed to divide, exclude, and consolidate power. If whiteness were about skin color, who could be more white than the Irish? Yet, when Irish immigrants arrived in the United States, they weren't considered white. They had to fight, sometimes literally, to gain access to the privileges of whiteness. This journey reveals the true nature of race, not as a matter of biology, but as a tool of exclusion and hierarchy." End quote. You just don't even have to scratch very far beneath the surface to see that. You think about it for 2 minutes and you can see the silliness of it, the childishness of it. And if you're like, who's pulling the strings? It's like, is it the rich people who are extremely powerful and want to maintain that power and their wealth? That seems like the, Occam's razor answer to me.
Another layer of this, though, like the white supremacists, especially when you say pulling the strings, will say the Jews,
of course,
which is another group of people who breaks this idea of whiteness because, European Jews specifically, like they're European, they're white people based on whatever white is. Jewish people from Europe fit that, except for their religion. And they've turned it into this whole other thing that they are an other and must be discovered. And they are scarier because they cannot be fully white. Like Nazis have allowed Irish people to be white. I think they're okay with Italian people. I'm not sure about my Nazi lore, but
depends on skin tone.
The Jews will, yeah, exactly. But the Jews will never be a part of that. And that's why they're the scariest of all the people, because they can infiltrate and control and do all these other things.
According to the Nazis, yeah.
According to the Nazis. And that's another super childish belief that there's this one group of people who, based on their religion and whatever, control everything, as opposed to the structural, actual people who are controlling things, who are doing it by their wealth in this economic system and have actual power and influence to buy elections, to control your workplace, all these things are unrelated to race. They are related to money
Right.
and wealth accumulation.
And on that very note, the best and most accurate, because it is the origin of it all, example of that is what happened after Bacon's Rebellion. So we're talking 1600s Jamestown, and there wasn't really, like, there were black people and white people, but there wasn't really the construct of race as we, certainly not even close to as we see it now, and even as we did in prior centuries at that point. And Bacon is not some abolitionist or anything. He was just a white man with land, and he wanted to have more land. And so he thought it would be good if the settlers kicked more native people off their land and murdered more of them. And so, in that effort to do that, he was able to convince indentured servants, white and black, to join him in his fight against the native people and promise them freedom. That was the dangling carrot. And that's why he drew in so many people. Now, the government at the time in Virginia did not want to do this. They actually thought it would cause a broader outbreak of war. They thought that would be bad, and they didn't have the means to deal with that anyway. And so it was this strange, battles of power that were going on there. But his pitch to have these indentured servants fight for him basically worked, because, of course, when told, as long as you go fight the Native Americans, you'll be free from your indentured servitude, that sounds like a good deal, right? That's your only way out. And so after all of this happened, and they burned Jamestown to the ground because of the disagreements with the government in place at the time. Afterwards, all the white wealthy landowners were like, oh, this seems not good that this could happen. This seems like a bad thing. And the fact that white indentured servants and black indentured servants saw themselves on the same playing field and saw themselves as the same. So we're going to have to manipulate the population in some way and make sure that the laws in place say that a black person is hereditarily an enslaved person and that white people are different. And that is truly the origin of how we got, laws on the books, but then the impact culturally of how people really saw themselves as separate. It was a manipulation by rich white people who wanted to stay rich and stay in power. That's how this all started. And I didn't know that history until I was in my late 20s. Like, it's not something that gets talked about very often. It is in the African American History Museum, at least the last time I went, which was years ago. But that story should be told often, that this was crafted and orchestrated by rich and powerful men who wanted to stay rich and powerful. And just to make sure that the distinction between a white indentured servant and a black indentured servant was really, really clear. There were no more black indentured servants. They just had a huge influx of slaves. That was like the kickstart to the slave trade as we know it, because they knew if they could bring in more enslaved people, then they didn't have to deal with the risk of indentured servitude. And then they would be seen by indentured servant white people as very different. Someone who is enslaved versus someone who is an indentured servant, you could see yourself as better than that or above that.
Yeah, how people see themselves, how they are depicted is so core to this. And it plays out in exactly the same way with the Irish as being described in this article, even though Irish people have no melanin difference in their appearance, but the perception that gets presented sounds exactly like racist depictions of black people. So this article says political cartoons of the era depicted Irish immigrants as ape-like, drunken, and violent. And then also mentions the famous signs reading "No Irish need apply" were a fixture in American cities. That is so exactly identical. Get some new material, guys. Like calling people apes. It's like, yeah, all right, I get it. You're dehumanizing people. You're making them sound less than fully human. It's the same playbook regardless of race. And the whole point of this article is like, it's so obviously not about race. It is just a power play. And the fact that they use the same playbook each time, you're like, puts the lie to it so obviously. And the article continues saying, quote, the Irish were often described as a distinct and inferior race, biologically different from Anglo-Saxon Protestants. This racialization meant that despite their pale skin, they weren't granted the privileges of whiteness. Whiteness wasn't simply a matter of complexion, it was a political category tied to power, status, and dominance. End quote. I mean, we just need to keep hitting the note. Like, it's not real. It is a smoke screen for power. It is a trick used to fool people into looking somewhere other than at the people who are robbing you blind. That's it. It's not complicated, and it happens over and over and over and over.
Yeah, divide and conquer is a phrase for a reason.
Yeah, like the wealthy elite who espouse racist views do not want to share their wealth and power based on race. They don't want to share their wealth and power with white people because, look, we're all white. Let's share
Yeah.
wealth and power. Hell no. They want to divide, get racist white people on their side to support them, and then continue to hoard the wealth and power for themselves.
And it works over and over and over again because human beings, all of us, share this in common. We are difference distinguishing machines. That's part of the reason why we're here. Our ancestors survived because they could tell, well, that grass is moving strange. Got to pay attention to that. It's not like the other grass. They survived. The people that couldn't, they got eaten by whatever the thing was that was moving the grass. We're really good at noticing difference. Science will tell us over and over again how almost like statistically indistinguishable all of us are from each other, how similar we are. Yet, here watching this video, I can see the difference between all of us. I can distinguish all of us. Our features are different, but they're all the same things. Like people are people, but people are really good at saying why some people aren't people. And that's why this works. It works over and over again. And like Jay said, you can hear it. It's the same language that was used against the Irish, that's used against Black people, that's currently being used against Palestinians. Like it's the same thing over and over again because it works. They don't have to change up the message because the message will hit the right/wrong person the exact same way over and over again so that they can be used as tools to further this small group of people's desire for wealth and power.
I think this is when we could learn from inoculation. Because I mean, that's really what it feels like. I don't even want to say America has failed to do. Just people in their storytelling at some point, the inoculation stops, it ends, or it's not strong enough to surpass some of these narratives. But I was thinking about it in reference to misinformation and disinformation and societies that have been effective in teaching their population how to inoculate themselves from it. And I think here it's so effective because we don't talk about it. Like our rewriting of history, how we approach it, even in our education setting, isn't a true narrative, isn't a true inoculation of these ideas. So I really feel like, oh God, I know it's not the time in our cultural climate, but I'm like, we really do need anti-racism to infiltrate our schools to help with this inoculation, like the storytelling, being able to compare all of these examples throughout history where people have been dehumanized, where they've been described as primitive, because it continues to be used. Like I know that Deon referenced a couple. I was even thinking about the Holocaust in Germany, the way Jews were described. It is like very parallel to our stories here in America, and I am positive that we would find them elsewhere in the world. So I think globally, just as people, we have to find a way to actually truly combat this and to not forget to continue telling these stories. Because, like, yes, at one point people knew to fight Nazis, but they forgot to keep telling their children and their children's children that we have to fight Nazis.
Yeah, gotta. And the reason they stop telling the story is because it feels like something you shouldn't have to repeat. That's the tricky thing about humanity in the intergenerational sense. It's like, do we really have to tell that story? Yeah, you really have to tell that story over and over and over. So I'm going to keep it hitting the note of all the different reasons why the promise of white supremacy is bullshit. And so we've talked about the power angle, but the other reason it's a total false promise is that people might think that they want power over their enemies, but it's actually a fearful power. You still never get to the point of like peace and security because the idea of an uprising is always going to live in the back of your mind. So the only way to have true peace absent of oppression, like the white supremacists, they are feeling oppressed. They feel like they need their community. They feel like they need like only my people around me, and then I can be happy. But their long-term goal is let's start building tiny little enclaves and then connect them together and then build a white nationalist nation.
Yeah.
And the ultimate end of that is conflict with anyone who does not fit that nation. And so then the only option is, well, I guess we have to dominate them. And that will never be peaceful. That will never be like, oh, great, like I finally have my community and I can relax. No, if there are oppressed people, there will always be the fear of an uprising. And that creates this like internal conflict, fear, tension in the mind that like, again, it is not the path to happiness that anyone says they want.
And they will oppress themselves and cause their own break and uprising.
Yeah. Okay. So it turns out Frederick Douglass also had some ideas about the lie of the fantasy that Black people in particular is who he was talking about, but it could be applied to basically anyone in the country that white supremacists want to get rid of. The fantasy that Black people could ever be purged from the country. So there's a famous Frederick Douglass quote, "The white man's happiness cannot be purchased by the Black man's misery." And heard that recently. It was in an episode of Best of the Left, wherever you get your podcasts. And I thought, like, I want to know more about that. I want to hear sort of the background of that quote and where it came from. And I started out just reading a couple little explainer articles about the quote. And I got to say, I feel like the people who wrote these articles, like very well-meaning, but I feel like they didn't go and read the quote in context and just put their modern lens smack on it and assumed that they were right. But it's an interesting thing to examine. So like here's one description from elevatesociety.com, just a guy trying to write some interesting things on the internet. And he says, quote, "This quote encapsulates a fundamental moral principle, emphasizing that genuine happiness and prosperity for one group should never be built upon the oppression, misery, or injustice imposed on another group. It urges us to recognize the interconnectedness of humanity and the moral imperative of achieving justice and equality for all." He goes on and talks about the ethics and the moral imperatives. And I was like, is that really what he said? The quote is, "The white man's happiness cannot be purchased by a Black man's misery." There was a lot of talk about what we should not do. So went and found another one. This from SocraticMethod.com, very similar. And it says, "This profound quote encapsulates a fundamental truth about justice and equality, emphasizing that one group's well-being should never come at the expense or suffering of another. Douglas's words hold immense importance in highlighting the inherent injustice of a society built on the oppression and exploitation of marginalized communities. It serves as a poignant reminder of the interconnectedness of humanity and the moral imperative to strive for collective upliftment rather than individual gain at the cost of others' pain," end quote. And again, I was like, if you're changing cannot to should not, it actually changes the meaning in such a way that presupposes that happiness could be purchased by the Black man's misery, but it shouldn't because that would be immoral. And I'm like, but that's not what he said. He didn't say should. So changing cannot to should not, actually changes the meaning of the quote in such a way that presupposes that the white man's happiness could be purchased by the black man's misery. It just shouldn't be, because that would be immoral, which literally the words being used is not what Frederick Douglass said. And so I definitely needed to go read it in context. But this continuing quote from the same article trying to explain it, like, really encapsulates something. It says, quote, "This call for empathy and ethical consideration resonates deeply in our contemporary world, where systemic inequalities and social injustices continue to plague societies around the globe. It challenges us to confront our privilege and power dynamics, questioning the morality of benefiting from systems that perpetuate the suffering of marginalized communities." End quote. Now, look, I also live in the present. I endorse all of these things. I'm like on board with the modern conceptualization of race and power dynamics and all of that. But this is a really perfect encapsulation of pulling a quote from the past and filtering it through a contemporary understanding that really ends up misunderstanding what the quote is actually about. And frankly, I think the original quote is better. So going to the original context, this is a speech Douglas gave, but I think it was also published as an article. And he starts out, he's talking about how Black people have persisted in the country for hundreds of years, despite all of the hardships they've experienced, and expects that that will continue. And therefore, quote, "The destiny of the colored man is bound up with that of the white people of his country, be the destiny of that latter what it may." Then he also makes the economic case, saying, quote, "We are as laborers too essential to the interest of our white fellow countrymen to make a very grand effort to drive us from this country among probable events. While labor is needed, the labor cannot fail to be valued, and although passion and prejudice may sometimes vociferate against us and demand our expulsion, such efforts will only be spasmodic and can never prevail against the sober second thought of self-interest. We are here, and here we are likely to be. To imagine that we shall ever be eradicated is absurd and ridiculous," end quote. He's like, dude, you need people to do the work. You're not going to get rid of us. And then, based on the premise that Black people are not going anywhere, he goes on talking about US policies targeting Black people and says that they are, quote, "as fraught with evil to the white man as well as to his victim. The white man's happiness cannot be purchased by the Black man's misery. Virtue cannot prevail among the white people by its destruction among the Black people, who form a part of the whole community. It is evident that the white and Black must fall or flourish together," end quote. That is not a moral argument. He is not appealing to anyone's ethics. He is pointing out the actual hard truth that there is no other choice than for people to learn to live together. And so you might as well figure out how to do it in the best way possible.
Destinies are intertwined. Yeah.
I want to add brown people to this now, because that's what we're doing right now.
Mhm.
Like, this is the current administration's plan to make America great, to make white people happy, is to get rid of, initially it was, the criminals, but obviously, like, functionally, it is just getting rid of anyone with a foreign sounding last name and too much melanin. And there are people, white people, who recognize, like, that voted for Trump. I'm thinking of farmers, ranchers specifically, that are losing laborers, that are losing money because they don't have people to do these jobs. It was short-sighted at best to think we're going to get rid of all this illegal immigrant labor, but also just denial reality that this country was functioning on a large portion of illegal immigrant labor, because they were people not only that were willing to do the job cheaply, but were very capable. Like, that's the part that white supremacists want to deny, is that Black people are capable, that brown people are capable, that they do have value, that they can do things that they think that only white people can do for some reason, even though history says otherwise. Like the fact that Frederick Douglass in the 1800s can say all these things that we are quoting in 2025 is a testament to him as an individual, but just how strong people that lived through slavery actually were. And when you think of American culture, when people outside of America think of American culture, a lot of what they're thinking of is Black people's contribution to America, like the music, the art, the just style. Like that's a part of America. It is America. I'm old enough to remember when I stopped being Black and became African American, and I have always felt something very strange about that. Like this distinction that I have to put on a census that I'm not just an American, I'm a different version of American. I've never lived anywhere else. I was born here. My dad was born here. His dad was born here. His dad was born here. We've been in America a long fucking time. I don't know how long because of what we were talking about earlier. The records are not pristine, but going back to that guy, the Return to the Land, in his article, he was talking about how he's here with the Pilgrims or whatever, because all Nazis were here with the Pilgrims. It's amazing how they were all have all been here since the beginning.
No shit.
But so Black people, you know, like we've been here a long time too. Like it's denying that is ridiculous. And Hispanic people have been here longer. It's just a denial of reality. We live in a country that has Native American names, Spanish names. We're too lazy to fucking change them. So they're just part of who America is, but we can't acknowledge that that's what this country has been. It is this denial of reality. And like that is what that quote and that whole context of what Jay read was about, is this: you can deny reality all you want to, but reality is reality. Black people are here. They're not going away. White people are not going to be happy because they're punishing Black people. White people are not going to be happy because an immigrant was kicked out or separated from their family. That is not how happiness is derived. Happiness is derived from cooperation and sharing and learning to live with people who are different than you, like learning to live with yourself. That's, I think, a huge part of this is like none of these people have learned how to live with themselves, learned how to deal with the ridiculousness of white supremacy and the expectations it puts on white people, because a lot of white people who aren't doing well in this society feel even worse because they have been told that they are superior, but their life doesn't reflect that. And I guess the problem must be that Black people exist. I guess the problem must be that brown people exist, because it's harder to do that than to, evaluate the reality of the situation.
I would also like to offer an alternative. You can become an incel and hate women and blame them for all the problems too.
It's all mixed together.
You have options.
I mean,
options.
I think the
All
preference
one
is to
and
do
the same.
both.
Yeah.
Like
It's-
why one? Why,
Oh, that's
why not
the
both?
sweet spot, right?
It's easier to just cover all your bases
Yeah, why not both?
boy.
than, Okay, so I think we have made a compelling case today that white supremacists who are pursuing happiness would be better off giving up on the fantasy of a white ethno-state being a possible path to happiness. But supposing that they don't take our good advice, the Kansas City Defender has some suggestions for the rest of us in this article. Missouri is next. Neo-Nazi network expanding whites-only towns. Here's where they're looking. And I'll read a bit of this. It says, quote, "This requires vigilance at every level. Community organizing. Residents in rural Missouri communities need to be aware of who's buying land in their areas and what they're planning to do with it. Legal accountability. Missouri lawmakers need to proactively investigate this group, the RTTL's Return to the Land activities in the state, and make clear that attempts to circumvent fair housing laws will be met with the full force of legal action. Media scrutiny. RTTL thrives when they can control their narrative, presenting themselves as harmless homesteaders celebrating European heritage. Investigative journalism that exposes their ties to violent extremism and their explicitly racist ideology disrupts that narrative. And political pressure. State legislators and local officials must make clear that Missouri will not be a safe haven for white supremacist organizing. This means enforcing existing civil rights laws and considering additional legislation to close the loopholes RTTL is attempting to exploit. And then, of course, it requires everyone. They say, particularly white Missourians who may be tempted to dismiss this as not my problem, to recognize that the fight against fascism is not abstract. It's not somewhere else. It's not someone else's battle. It's here, it's now, and it's coming to Missouri. And of course, this is a Missouri publication, and so they're talking about Missouri, but anyone who is in the path of an organization like this, which is, I mean, their goal is to expand. They want to spark more communities like this. And so anyone affected by it needs to be vigilant about where this is happening and what they can do about it.
I mean, I think this ties to what we just said, the very idea that it could be someone else's problem. All of our fates and destinies are intertwined here. This is not something you can just say is happening to someone else. It is happening to all of us. And everyone shares responsibility in finding a way to fight back.
As the resident Missourian who is going to be next door neighbors to white supremacists at some point, or might be now, like, I understood everything that they were saying, all the calls to action, and I thought they were great. But I made the joke before we got on here, like, I'm not going to call my representative because I think my representative might be a Nazi. I'm not going to say who it is, but everything, and I'm, not just the U.S. rep who suspicions about, but like my state rep specifically. I don't know, man. I don't think he's going to be against this. I think he might be looking into joining that LLC at some point. That's the issue. Like, we've let this fester so long. We've let Nazis become normal again in our society. Like, even your average racist white person 20 years ago didn't like Nazis either. But now it's just becoming more of a just culturally acceptable. Brought up Nick Fuentes earlier. None of us should know who Nick Fuentes is. None of us should know who Nick Fuentes is. I knew about him a little before everybody on here. I think I told Jay about him years ago. I shouldn't have known about him then. Now he's on podcasts that get millions of views.
Yeah.
And it's not adversarial, not why do you believe this dumb shit? Why are you an incel? Why do you hate women? Why do you hate Jews? Why do you hate black people? No, it's just to have a conversation with them. And that's the kind of stuff that leads to these organizations being able to just pretend, I guess, lightly pretend that they're not Nazis while supporting Nazis on social media. We saw several different tweets from them that are just Nazi apologia. And now they're proudly talking about expanding. This has to stop when all people are not okay with it. And again, I do think there was a time when the vast majority of people in America were against Nazis. And that was part of the storytelling. Erin brought that up earlier. Our storytelling has to reflect that. I think we need to go back to a more concrete storytelling about Nazis being bad and not Indiana Jones fighting Germans.
Right.
They're not there over there anymore. They're here,
right,
and they're comfortable, and they're proud, and they're in our government. And, one of our senators, like Josh Hawley, I do not like Josh Hawley at all, but I think Josh Hawley might be a better senator than Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt recently gave a speech at a conservative conference that was, I want to say dog whistles about being a white supremacist, but I could hear him. I could hear him pretty loud. Yeah, they're like
that's called train whistle.
Yeah, train whistles.
Right,
I think he was train whistling white supremacy. One of 100 people in the Senate, just being an as open as he could be white supremacist. That's where we're at in our country. And this group said they wanted to go to Arkansas because of the red state, and they want to do the same in Missouri because of the red state. And again, I've talked about it on here before. This is not explicitly a red state. It has been gerrymandered as such.
Right.
It has been talked about as such in the national media, but we have two very large enclaves of progressives in St. Louis and Kansas City. I think Kansas City more than St. Louis even. But it used to be a purple state. It used to be a bellwether
The
state.
bellwether state.
It used to be a state that had Democratic politicians be governor. It used to be all these things. And I don't think it's that far removed from it. But the way we talk about it is this is inevitable. This is the only way it's ever going to be again. And that is playing right into these people's hands. They're still the fringe. They just have more power than they've had in the past. But it's not a universally held belief. And people who do not believe this way have to speak up.
Even though they do seem quite proud of saying horrific, vile things, when the New York Times interviewed the leader of this group, they noted in the article that when they took his picture, he went over to his bookshelf and turned his copy of Mein Kampf around so that it wasn't in the picture. And they mention how other white supremacists are praising this group for their use of the media. And so I was glad the media was mentioned in the action items by the Kansas City Defender, because the media, it's tough, right? You're balancing, am I platforming someone or am I like calling it out and bringing this very important story to everyone's attention so they know and can fight it, right? There's this delicate balance. First of all, using the words that are accurate is super, super important, and not cleaning it up or sanitizing it in any way. But also, journalists need to recognize that they are being used. So they need to go into these stories and into these settings very aware of how they are being manipulated and used to these, these people, these groups benefit. And so it is important to call out things like, well, gee, turned around a book on the bookshelf. Let me see what that was. Like, I don't know how that went down exactly, but that is important to say. But that should be your signal as a journalist to be like, oh, I'm being used and manipulated. And I need to maybe dig deeper here or frame this differently, because if I am writing articles that are supposed to benefit the public knowledge, I need to tell the whole contextual truth and not just this straight reporting that doesn't give you the deeper picture. So, in some ways, that Nazi knows that it's not a good look to have Mein Kampf on his bookshelf, right? He knows that in order to reach a broader audience, he needs to make sure that's flipped around and that no one sees that right off the bat in a picture. To me, that's oddly like this tiny little bit of hope that they still are aware that most people think liking Hitler is bad. And let's make sure that is still the case. Let's lean into that being horrifying, anti-social, anti-patriotism. Like, let's lean into the fact that their little concerns about maybe I might turn some people off if I have this on my bookshelf are absolutely confirmed and correct. And that's the kind of energy that needs to be brought in opposition to these kinds of groups.
And if it's not already so obvious that they're scapegoating Black and brown people for all the misery that they're experiencing, all the unhappiness, I think back to the entry questions that they ask
Mhm.
and how they also include a question about members' feelings around transgenderism.
Mhm.
And that right there, historically, when you look at neo-Nazi groups, there is always other groups that are also targeted, and it is absolutely LGBT people. I find it interesting, and I don't know, I haven't taken this exam, this entry, I don't
Survey,
know,
yeah.
submission, whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah, survey. But it's interesting that they don't ask about the people identifying as gay. And I don't know if it's because they assume that this question will weed out a lot of queer people, like in general, or if they know better, like in the socially acceptable realm, that it is more acceptable to be
Mhm.
anti-trans than it is to be anti-gay, lesbian,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. So I do find that interesting. I should stop saying I find it interesting. Deon is going to take
I know. We
issue
need to
with
find a
that.
better word, because
I mean, it just gives away the
it's
gag.
revealing.
Like,
It's revealing. That's what it is.
it's very revealing. Yeah. And I also want to lecture, anyone from this group who could happen upon our video, our stream, and see us talking about this and realize that their European ancestry also includes an illustrious history of queer, trans, other identified people. That's definitely in your European ancestry. Recommend the book Third Gender. It takes you through all kinds of examples throughout history of trans people, people existing across all sex and gender spectrum. So you need to learn your history a little bit more before you claim it, apparently.
If you read Mein Kampf and you keep it proudly displayed on your bookshelf, you're probably not going to read Third Gender, but it'd be cool if you did.
Yeah, you'd be a lot cooler.
It's like
if
an
you did.
invitation. I just want them to be informed about the
Right.
ancestry that they're claiming. That's
Erin,
fair.
you haven't taken that test, you would fail so miserably.
And wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah. Proudly fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So to wrap up this really great article from the Kansas City Defender, we had not heard of this publication before, but they wrote a blistering article on this topic. And so now we like them a lot. Right at the top of what you can do is prevent the normalization of Nazis. It says, quote, if you see RTTL attempting to organize in your community, document it. If you see land being purchased by their LLCs, report it. If you see white supremacists attempting to normalize their ideology, confront it. The time to stop them is now, before they own the land, before they establish the infrastructure, before they set legal precedent that could open the floodgates for segregationist projects across the country. And more take action items. Share this article to raise awareness about RTTL's plans in Missouri. Contact your state legislators and demand they investigate RTTL's activities. Support organizations fighting white supremacy and defending civil rights, and stay informed. Subscribe to the Kansas City Defender for ongoing investigation into extremist organizations in the Midwest. Did we solve it? Did we lay out...
We made a hell of a case.
Did we lay out the path to bring white supremacists to a place where they could find actual happiness by not being so angry all the time?
Just chill the fuck out, guys. Jesus.
Just chill out.
God damn.
Don't be a simp.
That's right.
Don't fall for it, man.
Yeah.
Be mad at white CEOs
Right.
and black CEOs. You can be
Yeah,
mad at
and-
black CEOs too.
Anybody with power who's wielding it to manipulate you. Yeah, that'd be a better target.
Yeah, there we go. And since we're covering all of our bases, we also gave some ideas for what non-white supremacists can do to prevent the horrors of a white ethno-state from taking shape. So I'm feeling good about this one. If you have any thoughts you would like to share, you can leave us a message at 202-999-3991. Find us on Signal at the handle bestoftheleft.01, or you can send an email to j@bestoftheleft.com. And remember that, bizarrely, this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.